Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, April 13th, 2023. It is 4:32 in the morning. Okay. This is chapter 7. I have no idea what part. Paul. I had a dream about this book. Okay, so that's why I started reading it. Okay. Remembering, realizing, and releasing. As we wind our way to the end of this chapter, let me suggest something to remember, something to realize, and something to release. 3 timeless principles to help you take the truths you've been reading and place them permanently in your heart. First, remember that suffering is not new. In the oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job, we read, "For man is born for trouble, as sparks fly upward." Job chapter 5, verse 7. Now there's a statement we need to teach our children and grandchildren starting today. The message they consistently hear is that God has nothing but happiness and success in store for them if they'll entrust their lives to Him. The Bible never promises that. Amazingly, while scraping sores from his diseased and pain-racked body, Job asked, "Shall we indeed accept good from God and not adversity?" He made that statement in response to his wife's advice to curse God and die. She too was broken from the loss of her children and the misery of watching her husband suffer so terribly. As a young preacher, I came down too hard on Job's wife. Now I go easier on her. She was grieving, not blaming. She needed God's perspective on her pain. It was when her husband witnessed how deep her grief was that he responded as he did. He wanted her to realize that God is not a heavenly bellboy, delivering only pleasurable and comforting things to our door. He doesn't exist to make us happy. We exist to bring Him glory. We live in superficial, skeptical times. When hard times occur, you will find scores of newly released titles questioning how a loving God could be so unfair and unjust. It is easy to be confused in one's understanding of God. But He has not changed. His ways have not been altered. As with Job and Saul, He continues to allow suffering to mold us into humble, useful servants. In one of his early books, Philip Yancey writes, "A shelf of all the religious books on this subject would cleanly divide into 2 groups. The older ones by Bunyan, Donne, Luther, Calvin, Augustine, and others are almost embarrassing in their readiness to accept pain and suffering as among God's useful agents. A sense of loyalty and faith in God's wisdom undergirds each one. God knows what He is doing in this world, and these authors do not question His actions, but they merely try to justify the ways of God's to man." More modern books on pain, beginning with some of the agnostic philosophers of the 19th century and continuing through to many Christians today, contrast sharply. These authors assume that the amount of evil and suffering in this world cannot be matched with the traditional view of a good and loving God. Therefore, many of them adjust their conception of God either redefining his love or questioning his power to control evil. If you read these two categories of books side by side, the difference is quite striking. It is as if we in modern times think we have a corner on the suffering market. Do we forget that Luther and Calvin and the others lived in a world without ether and penicillin, and that Bunyan and Donne wrote their greatest works in a dungeon? Throw one of us in a dungeon and we want to talk to our lawyer. Throw those guys in prison and the world ends up with Pilgrim's Progress or some other magnificent literary work that endures for centuries. Putting our suffering back into perspective, resist the temptation to rethink God just because hard times come. Look deeper. Cling to him tighter. Refuse to question his motives. He's doing something great within you. Suffering is nothing new. Second, realize that suffering plays a beneficial role. That realization will keep you from searching for someone to blame. Let me be candid. You may be consumed today with that person you feel is to blame for most of your suffering. You see him when you close your eyes. You think of him when you awaken in the morning. You get depressed when you recall the injustice of his actions. Your secret desire is to retaliate. Bitterness fills your soul, and a slow burning rage fuels the fire of hatred. I know what it is to hate. I hated a man once so intensely it began to consume me until I realized I was the one losing. And of all things, he was winning. I can tell you firsthand that's no way to live. Realize that, even in the injustice of it all, the suffering you endure can ultimately turn to your benefit. God is working. Only he knows the end from the beginning, and he knows you and your needs far better than even you do. Don't ask, why is this happening to me? Rather, ask the question, how should I respond? Okay. Otherwise, you'll miss the beneficial role suffering plays in life. Okay. So that's all for this section. I'm just going to say this is section 2. Or part 2. I have no idea. I didn't write down the parts. So, okay. Thank you for watching.